Rain tasted like metal and old coins. It laced the wind, it needled my cheeks, it turned the kitchen steps into a mirror that could have swallowed me if I slipped. The porch light above the back door burned a patient yellow the way it had since I was a kid who came home covered in salt. I wrapped my hand around the brass knob. Heat lived on the other side of that knob. Voices lived there too. They curled under the door in soft threads and tugged. China met China. A knife whispered across a plate. A chair moved a few inches and then stopped as if the floor had asked for quiet. If someone could cover the rehearsal dinner, it would look perfect for the photos. The voice was soft and careful. A ribbon pulled tight. It was not my mother. It was the other woman at the table, the one who had brought her own sparkle and her own rules and her own calendar into our house. Another voice followed. She is in uniform. She is doing fine. The words had a shrug in them. Casual confidence that came from using my name without saying it. I did not push the door. The wood swelled in damp weather and the hinges sighed when they were made to work. I could see the room without seeing it. The long oak table. The seating chart laid out on the runner like a map that promised everything. Right there at the top corner, a pink marker without a cap bled a bright dot into the paper. Someone had been drawing circles around the names as if moving people were a game. She would want to help. It would mean a lot to our guests. The soft voice again. I could picture the smile that went with it. Polite, measured, never too much, never too little. A smile that sounded like the clink of clean glass. My brother laughed. Ethan always laughs the way a person laughs when a plan has skipped the step where you ask permission. She will not mind the number. It is a family thing. His chair creaked and then settled. That sound pushed at my chest harder than the rain did. A spoon tapped a glass. My mother. She has tapped that way since I was little, and she wanted to end a fight without naming it a fight. The rehearsal dinner should feel generous, she said. We only do this once. The room breathed together. I heard napkins fold, breath go out, a fork land softly on porcelain. They did not say sailor. They said she. They said the uniform. They talked like people talk about an account they all use and no one owns. I stood at the door and studied the rain where it fell in silver strings off the roof. The sound was gentle enough that a person could pretend not to hear words that were meant to be private. Pretending did not make the words less true. I let go of the knob. It left a crescent of heat in my palm. I stepped back onto the slick board, and the board moved by a hair under my heel. That tiny shift was enough to remind my body of the deck when a long wave slides under and you learn again to trust your knees. I walked down the steps and into the yard. Gravel held the heat the day had left behind and blew it back against the rain. In the car, I stayed still long enough to fog the window where my breath reached it. The wipers waited. The engine stayed quiet. I could see through the side mirror the warm square of the kitchen window and the blurred shapes of people who have loved me well and loved me badly and sometimes in the same minute. My phone lit the dark of my lap. The lock screen was a picture I had taken from the bow last winter when the bay turned the color of pewter and the foam at the cut curled up like script. I opened a new message. I kept it short. I will not pay for any event that I did not agree to. I love you. I am not a wallet in uniform. I read it twice. The sentences looked like buoys in a line, the kind that mark a safe channel. I pressed send. The dot traveled across the bar, faded, and the message landed where it needed to land. I put the phone face down. The case had a nick on the corner where it had met a ladder badly, and I smoothed that line with my thumb. Headlights slid over the soaked path when I turned the key. The elm at the bend caught the light for a second and threw it back in a pale wash. Then the house was behind me, and the road opened its mouth. I drove to the pier at the end of Bay Row, the one with planks that always looked like they were about to give up and yet never did. The tide had finished climbing and began to consider its way back down. Seaweed clung to the posts with a stubborn perfume. I cut the engine and listened to rain tap the hood in patient fingers. After a time, I stepped out and walked to where the boards were wet enough to shine. The water moved without hurry. I would have liked to borrow that calm. In my pocket, my service pin lay against the coins and the spare key to the locker I never used. I rolled the pin between my fingers until the edges bit in just enough to make me aware of my own hand. The gesture steadied me in a way I had learned to trust. Far behind me, a kitchen light burned and watched people write names in soft circles. Out here, there was only the dark and the gentle sound of a gull that never quite found the note it wanted. I did not say any vows out loud. I had already said them in the message. I breathed until my chest cracked open and then settled again. I tucked the pin back into the pocket and found the other familiar weight. A fountain pen my father had given me on a birthday we had both tried to keep simple. The barrel warmed quickly in my hand. The cap clicked against the threads with a sound I liked. The ink was a blue that looked like a harbor after sunset. I held it and thought about the way he had tested the pen with a practical nod. He had not said proud. He had said this will last. I put the pen away and drove back toward base. The highway sucked water up and flung it aside. My wipers found a rhythm and kept it like a drummer who knows his job. In the glove box, a save the date card had escaped its sleeve during a turn and now lay across the passenger seat like a pet who wanted attention. I picked it up at a red light. The letters were gilt. The paper was heavier than paper needs to be. On the back in a small, polite font, it said curated by A. I did not try to decide which A the letter sat in my mind like a tile that might later fit in a mosaic. By the time the guard at the gate lifted the arm, the rain had softened to a fine mist. I rolled down the window, gave him my name, took in his lined face, and the way his eyes brightened by habit even at this hour. "Welcome back," he said. I said the same 2 words to him and to myself. In the barracks, the air smelled like detergent and coffee and the faint metal of wet boots. I folded my jacket over the chair. I set my phone on the desk with the screen flat. I looked at the room the way you look at a place that is not home and is also not entirely not home. The clock face watched me with calm indifference. I let it. I trimmed my worry down to one square thought. I had sent the message. I had set a light. I closed my eyes and found sleep the way a swimmer finds the bottom of a pool with one smart kick. Morning arrived in stripes. Sun threaded through the blinds and laid bars across the floor. I showered with the speed of a watch change. I dressed in a shirt I had ironed to the comfort of a ritual. The coffee machine did its small rumble. I drank 2 swallows and left the rest on the counter where it could cool into a smell that tells you a day has begun. The finance office lived 3 doors down and always felt colder than the rest of the hall. The petty officer at the computer had the color of paper that has seen the night through. He straightened when I stepped in. I told him what I needed: close the shared accounts, remove any auto transfers to family names, full review, full documentation by noon. His shoulders found a purpose. He asked for a code, then a second code, then a confirmation on a secure pad. He read names. I confirmed or I said no. Policy is a kind friend when the heart is loud. Paper understands how to be blunt without being cruel. When I walked back into the light, my lungs felt as if someone had opened a window in them. Not relief. Something cleaner, almost like appetite. I took that feeling to the planning room where charts covered the walls and the table looked like a sea made of paper. The department chief carried in a folder that could have stopped a door. He did not waste time. A multi-nation exercise needs a new coordination model. The last one failed during a fog event 2 months ago. You will build the prototype. You will pitch it at the forum next month. Bring a failure plan that does not fail. "Yes, sir," I said. The yes came out easy. Work is a ladder I trust. He studied my face and asked if I was in good shape. I said I was ready to work. He nodded. "Bring the young ones in. This is a team climb." By 10, the boards were full of lines and circles. At 11, my junior officer ran a simulation where 2 ships lost visual at close range. Her voice jumped as if it wanted to outrun the problem. I asked her to slow down. "Clear nouns, clear verbs, read like a lighthouse. We do not shout at fog. We speak so the fog has to move to make room for our voice." Her knuckles relaxed. Her mouth found the pace. The words fell into place and sounded like a bell. We ran that flow until the impatience left the room. At noon, I sat at my desk with a sandwich that looked better wrapped than open. My phone hummed one polite hum. The family calendar wanted attention. I looked without meaning to. A tiny heart icon pulsed next to a task that said payment. Assigned to Sailor by Aubrey. Due Friday. The heart blinked, then went still. I turned the phone face down again. The paper sandwich did not taste like much, but I finished half to keep faith with the body that has carried me through worse. At 1400, the anonymous email arrived. The address was a string of letters that made no sense. 3 images sat in the body like small windows. A board called Rehearsal Aesthetic. A column of notes about candlelight and sponsor-friendly angles. A chat where one line carried a weight that made the chest narrow. If she covers the dinner, the coverage will feel natural. Someone had circled the username at the top of the board in red. Aubrey Gray. The same neat taste that had signed curated by on the card. My mouth could have found fire. My fingers could have forwarded the note to every person who needed to see it and to a few who did not. I closed the window instead. Storms choose their hours. The work in front of me was the storm I could serve without burning my hands. By 16, we were testing a sequence where a trawler blasted music into the shared channel as proof that happy equals harmless. The latter caught the noise and moved it aside. At 18, the room smelled like metal and sweat and something close to hope. The forum committee wrote to say that my slot was confirmed. 20 minutes exact. Do not take 23. Bring proof that your model turns a small accident away from becoming a large one. I wrote that sentence on a card and slipped the card into the pocket where I keep the fountain pen. I took the pen out and touched the point to the corner of my notebook. The small dot bled in a blue that looked like dusk over a calm harbor. My father had given me the pen at a kitchen table that smelled like lemon oil and toast. He had pressed his thumb on the cap to hear the click and smiled at the sound. He had not said, "I am proud of you." He had said, "This will last." The memory came and went like a wave that does not break. When I stepped out, the rain had lost its teeth and turned to a fine mist that stuck to hair and skin and made the world look kind for a change. I thought that was a good sign, even if signs are only as good as what we do after we see them. Washington put on its mirror face the next day. Glass walls, carpets that hush footsteps into manners. The room where I would speak sat high enough to steal a view of the river and low enough that the view did not turn anyone into a tourist. I arrived early with a small case that held cables and a clean flash drive. The drive was plain silver and already had a scratch on one side from a careless meet between metal and zipper. I like useful scratches. They tell the truth without commentary. People filled the room in correct order. Marshals, advisors, a few uniforms from other flags that had learned to look neutral and alert at the same time. I plugged in the drive. The map rose on the main screen in a gentle wash of blue and white. I looked at the faces. I thought about the deck and the gull and the pink dot drying on the seating chart under my mother's light. I thought about the message I had sent in the car. The words sat inside me like stones that float. Good morning. I will propose a common language for fog and for music at the wrong time. A small smile moved through the room the way a breeze moves under a door. I built the talk the way I would build a ladder that someone else can use at night. Rung by rung. No cleverness for the sake of cleverness. A simple set of settings. Clear stamps that mark time. A failure plan that knows where it breaks and how to brace. I spoke for 6 minutes. I told a very short story about a bell that can be heard without being afraid of it. I showed a clip where the cheerful station slid into a side channel and the shared channel returned to a voice that could be trusted. Questions came. The naive one. The clever one. The sincere one that asks how the work lands on a tired crew at hour 19. We talked about what happens when habits of politeness are not the same and how to teach two crews to choose the same noun before they choose the same tone. When the session ended, a staffer with a schedule for a spine met me at the door. You were clear. Manuscript by Friday. Private dinner for visiting officers. Business casual. Bring a story. She said all of this without using commas and then disappeared the way people who are good at logistics know how to disappear. I stood in the hall and felt the quiet land on my shoulders like a warm towel. A text arrived from home. Come to dinner when you are back. No talk of money. We miss you. Hope looks different on a screen than it does in a room. On a screen it looks clean. In a room it looks like a hand that is not sure where to rest. I typed yes. I added a line that was not a dare and not a threat. If anyone raises a bill, I will leave before dessert. There was a pause long enough to feel like a choice. Then my mother sent a heart that looked almost steady. The top of the curve shook the way it shakes when you're out of practice and trying again. I walked by the river and let the wind sift my thoughts. Bridges arched over the water like questions that were willing to wait for an answer. A child dropped a bright leaf into the flow to see if it would sink or ride. The leaf rode. The child danced in approval of physics. I smiled even though the smile belonged to someone else's moment. At the hotel, I opened a new notebook and wrote a title. Signals that do not shout. Below it, I wrote the sentence I needed to keep close. Boundaries are lighthouses, not walls. The pen laid down blue like evening. I closed the book and held the warm cover to my chest for a second longer than a person needs to if that person has nothing to prove. The next morning started with iron clouds over the deck. We drilled and drilled until muscle had nothing left to invent. After lunch, I stepped into the passageway to catch a breath and found 2 messages waiting where I could not miss them. One from the forum that said the slot was locked. One from an unknown number that said we need to talk. The initials were a G. They could have been anyone. They could have been exactly the person I thought they might be. I pocketed the phone without answering. I have seen storms that want you to spend yourself before they arrive. I would not give this one the satisfaction. Evening turned the bay to lead. The city put on its necklace of lights. On my desk, the fountain pen waited with the patience of an anchor. I uncapped it and wrote the first paragraph of the manuscript. I kept my tone the way I keep my posture on a rolling deck. Upright, calm, plain. The phone finally rang with the tone I reserve for family. I let it ring twice so that I could finish the line I was writing. I answered and listened as my mother arranged her breath. She said, "Come home for dinner. It will be simple. No talk of payments." No surprises. There was a space where I thought she might say sorry. She did not fill it. She said please instead. It sounded better. I told her yes and told her the condition one more time. "If bills appear, I will leave." She said, "I understand." She sounded like a person who had practiced that sentence many times before it became real in her mouth. When I hung up, I looked at the save the date card on the edge of the desk. The gold letters still tried too hard to shine. Curated by a held its place like a small flag on a small hill. I touched the corner of the card and thought of calendars that assign tasks with tiny hearts. I thought of the board with the soft light around the table and the promise that photographs make when they are not being photographs yet. I did not feel anger. I felt a kind of clear air. The kind after rain when the world is honest about what it smells like. Sleep came easy and left before I was ready. I woke in the gray hour and walked the dock behind the barracks where the water makes a sound that is almost a voice. I ran my fingers over the smooth barrel of the pen in my pocket and thought of my father at the kitchen table. He had shown me with his hands how to set a light before you sail. Porch lights, good locks, clean tools. He had never liked big speeches. He had liked things that work when you need them. The pen wrote, "The light over the back door burned. The lock kept its promise." The tools waited on their hooks. In my head I started a small prayer without a name. Make my voice a harbor bell, make my rules lighthouses, make my leaving and my returning choices that belong to me. The sun lifted one flat edge above the water. The bay woke. Somewhere a gull found the note it wanted and held it. I turned toward the day with the sense that I had closed a door behind me without slamming it. The fact of that door felt like safety. The choice to open it again would be mine. I went to work. Morning began with the hum of vents and the smell of paper that had slept in metal drawers. I poured coffee that steamed against the cold window and tasted sharper than usual. The message I had sent last night still sat in my outbox, copied to my archive, small and complete. I read it once more as if to confirm it had not changed itself overnight. It had not. The finance office was 3 doors down from my quarters, a narrow room filled with the polite noises of printers that never truly stopped. The petty officer at the desk greeted me with that careful tone soldiers reserve for conversations involving numbers. He looked at my request form, looked at me, and nodded once. "Indefinite freeze on the family accounts," I said. "I'll sign anywhere you need." He entered a string of codes, his fingers moving in a steady rhythm. The monitor cast pale light over his face. I signed 3 forms. I initialed a 4th. Paperwork is a kind of armor. It can look dull, but it protects. When the final page slid into the folder, he said quietly, "Everything is closed now, Lieutenant." "Thank you." The word came out easier than I expected. I walked into the corridor feeling taller by half an inch. Maybe the air had changed, maybe I had. The planning wing was already alive. Maps covered every table, each coastline drawn like a line on a heartbeat. Commander Reese stood by the far wall with a folder that could have anchored a boat. He gestured me closer. "A multinational coordination exercise," he said. "Last model failed in fog. You build the prototype. You present it next month at the Alliance Forum. Bring a contingency plan that actually works." "Yes, sir." His eyes studied me. "You look like you slept less than orders allow." "I'm fine. Work helps." "Good. Take the junior officers through it. If they understand it, the admirals will." By 10, we had filled 2 whiteboards with lines and arrows. By 11, we were already erasing them, finding shorter paths between the same points. My young communications officer, Ari, simulated a close-quarters fog encounter. Her voice jumped through the static, too quick, too high. I put a hand on her shoulder. "Slow down, use clear nouns and strong verbs, sound like a lighthouse. You don't yell at fog, you make the fog move for you." She smiled the way people smile when fear is learning its place. "Copy that." We ran the drill until the rhythm felt like breath. Outside, rain pressed against the glass and drew long silver threads down the pane. I liked the sound, it made the inside sharper. At noon, I sat at my desk with a sandwich that smelled of mustard and salt. My phone pulsed once on the wood. I glanced down. The family calendar had updated itself. The title line was soft gray, the way polite demands often are. "Payment, assigned to Sailor by Aubrey." A small red heart blinked beside it. I stared until the heart stopped blinking. Then I turned the phone face down and kept eating. At 1400 hours, an email with no name and too many letters in the address slipped into my inbox. 3 attachments. The first was a design board titled Rehearsal Aesthetic. The second, a column of notes about lighting and photo coverage. The third, a screenshot of a chat. Someone had underlined one sentence in red: "If she covers the dinner, the coverage will feel natural." The sender had circled the username at the top, Aubrey Gray. The room tilted slightly, or maybe that was just the pulse behind my eyes. The cursor blinked in perfect rhythm with it. I could have forwarded the message to Ethan with a single tap. I could have copied it to my mother with another. I closed the window instead. Anger has its own gravity. If you step into it, it keeps you there. I chose work. The rest of the afternoon belonged to the ocean of data on my desk. Frequencies, delay patterns, the way sound travels across wet air. By 1600, we were testing a protocol that filtered civilian chatter from emergency bands. A fishing trawler had once broadcast a love song into a rescue channel. We built a gate that would never let that happen again. At 1800, my inbox pinged again, this time with official approval. Your presentation slot at the Alliance Forum is confirmed. 20 minutes. No extensions. Bring proof that your model prevents escalation. I wrote those words on a card and slipped it into the pocket with my father's fountain pen. The pen still smelled faintly of cedar from the box it came in. The cap clicked when I turned it, a small private sound that said steady. The day's last light slanted across the floor as I closed the folder. I thought of the rehearsal board with its candles and angles, of the pink marker bleeding onto paper, of the polite laughter behind that kitchen door. I thought of my father's voice teaching me to set a light before sailing. He meant porch lights and common sense, but the advice had grown with me. Set your light. Others can set theirs. The sea is big enough for all of them. I cleaned my desk. I straightened the maps. When I finally stepped outside, the rain had turned soft, almost kind, and the smell of salt from the bay drifted through the open corridor. Tomorrow would start with new coordinates, and I would be ready. The morning brief was a parade of numbers and abbreviations that only made sense to people who had memorized the rhythm of storms. I listened, took notes, and kept my mind steady on what mattered: clarity, not noise. When the meeting ended, the commander stopped me at the doorway. "Good work yesterday," he said. "They're calling your model the Yates pattern now." I laughed once, a quiet sound. "Then I hope it floats better than I do." He smiled. "Just make sure it doesn't sink anyone." I spent the rest of the morning cleaning up diagrams, checking data points, making sure every mark on the chart would make sense to someone who hadn't seen the sea in years. Each symbol was a small promise, and I kept them all. At lunch, I ate alone on the dock behind the operations building. The sky hung low enough to press on the water. It reminded me of the night outside my parents' house, that tight silence right before I turned away. It's strange what stays in your head, not the words, but the way silence feels after them. My phone buzzed once in my pocket. I let it. Another buzz. I ignored it again. By the third one, I gave in. The messages stacked one above another. Ethan asking if I'd seen the press release about the dinner, Mother reminding me not to skip meals, and finally a short text from Aubrey herself. "Hope the planning isn't too stressful. Everyone's excited to see you at the party. No apology." Not even a question mark, just polite punctuation, a tone polished enough to glide over what she had done. I typed a reply, then erased it. I typed another, deleted that too. The best answer to manipulation is oxygen deprivation, not fuel. I turned off notifications and let the phone go dark. The rest of the afternoon disappeared into simulations. Ari ran scenarios faster than yesterday, her voice steady, her eyes brighter. The pattern worked. Signals cleared faster. Commands repeated cleanly. The model would hold. When we shut down the monitors, she asked, "You ever get tired of being the one who fixes things?" I smiled. "Everyone gets tired. Some of us just can't afford to show it." That night, I packed for the trip to the Capitol. The forum would start in 3 days. My uniform jacket lay on the bed like a small promise I hadn't yet decided whether to keep. I checked the stitching, ran a lint roller across the fabric, and set it aside. In the mirror, I looked the same as yesterday but felt sharper at the edges. That's what setting boundaries does. It carves new lines into your reflection. You see where you end and the world begins. A knock came at the door. It was Commander Reese again, holding a thick envelope. "Special clearance," he said. "Your model going to be tested in a live simulation across fleets. Congratulations, Lieutenant." "Thank you, sir." He didn't leave right away. "One more thing," he said, lowering his voice. "The brass up top is watching. They'll want proof the human factor still matters." "It always does," I said. After he left, I turned the envelope over in my hands. My name was printed across the front in clean black ink. Beneath it, a seal of the Department of Maritime Security. I broke it open and scanned the contents: maps, communication schedules, encrypted codes. All of it felt heavier than the paper it was printed on. I worked late, copying coordinates, labeling channels. Around midnight, the base went quiet except for the occasional roll of tires on wet asphalt. Outside my window, the ocean whispered like it was thinking about something it wasn't ready to say. I reached for the fountain pen again. Its weight had become familiar, almost human. I wrote a single line in my notebook: lighthouses do not chase ships, they stand and shine. It wasn't poetry. It was a reminder. Before turning in, I opened my email once more. A message waited, time-stamped an hour ago. From my father. Subject line, test the ink. Inside were only 3 words: it doesn't fade. No greeting, no signature, just that. I stared at the screen for a long time. Maybe he had read my earlier message, maybe he hadn't. But it felt like his way of saying he saw me, still and steady, refusing to disappear. The next morning, the flight to Washington lifted through clouds so dense they looked solid. The city unfolded beneath us, a neat arrangement of rivers and ambition. I pressed my forehead to the glass and thought about the girl who used to trace these same outlines on a map and wonder if she'd ever escape them. In the hotel room, the air smelled of new paint and old carpets. I unpacked slowly, placing the pen on the desk beside my notebook, the same way I'd set a light on a table. Habit, anchor, protection. Evening came with its own ceremony. A welcome dinner for the delegates. I wasn't in the mood for conversation, but attendance was an order disguised as an invitation. The ballroom glowed with chandeliers that made everyone's eyes reflect gold. The hum of voices felt like static tuned to charm. I shook hands with people who spoke in careful sentences about peace and logistics. When they asked where I was stationed, I said on the water, and they smiled as if that were a metaphor instead of the truth. Halfway through the meal, my phone buzzed again. This time it wasn't family. It was Ari back on base. Storm front forming near the test area. Do we delay? I texted back no. We study storms by sailing into them, not around them. The waiter poured wine. I declined. My reflection in the glass looked calmer than I felt. Across the room, a photographer circled the tables, adjusting lenses, snapping candid smiles. The flash caught on something metallic and blew near the podium, a decoration shaped like a beacon, its light reflected by the silver ink of the event banner. I recognized the shape instantly. A lighthouse. I laughed quietly under my breath. The universe loves symbols, even cheap ones. Later that night, I stood on the balcony and watched rain smear the lights of the Capitol into ribbons. Below, the river coiled like a dark thought. The wind brought the faint echo of a horn from somewhere downstream. I whispered to it without meaning to. I'm still here. And for the first time in a long while, it sounded like a promise rather than a warning. The ship wore the morning like armor. Gray, cold, efficient. Wind pulled at the flags until the fabric sang. We were running drills before sunrise when the horizon still looked half-finished. I stood on the bridge, headset clipped tight, coffee long gone. The crew waited for orders that would turn the blur of training into something with edges. Scenario 1, I said. 2 vessels approaching. Fog rolling in. Shared channel clean. Visual contact lost at 30 seconds. Ari's voice came back steady. Copy that, engaging ladder protocol. Static hissed, then cleared. The simulated fog swallowed everything beyond the bow. I could taste salt through the filtered air. The console lights pulsed green. Maintain tone and timing, I reminded her. When you speak, think of the bell at the harbor mouth. Her second transmission landed clear, low, confident. We ran the sequence again, until muscle took over from thought. When it finally sounded right, I felt the small click in my chest that comes with knowing a crew has found rhythm. Outside, the sea shifted color, from pewter to dull silver. I looked out across it and thought about how boundaries work here. On land, they are fences and front doors. At sea, they are invisible until you cross them, and then they decide who you are. By mid-morning, the deck smelled of diesel and wet rope. A gull hovered off the port side, suspended between hunger and curiosity. Someone from the engine room shouted a joke I didn't catch, and laughter spilled up through the hatch. For a brief minute, the ship felt almost kind. Then a new sound broke the calm, a melody, bright and ridiculous, cutting through the shared frequency. A fishing trawler broadcasting music again, this time a cheerful dance tune that made the crew laugh even as it jammed the channel. Ari glanced at me. Let it play 10 seconds, I said. Then isolate the pattern. She ran the filters. One by one, the unwanted notes peeled away, leaving only the voice of the ship. When silence finally returned, I felt pride climb the back of my throat. That's the point, I said. Not to kill the noise, but to make room for the signal. She grinned. You should put that on a poster. I'll settle for the report. We wrapped the session near noon. The men and women filed out in twos, chattering, lighter for having done something well. I stayed behind, watching the monitors fade to black. My reflection hovered there, half uniform, half shadow. The message light on my phone blinked. I knew it before I saw it. Family. I told myself not to read it, but curiosity has its own rank and it rarely obeys orders. The first line said, "We only want what's best for you." The second said, "Everyone," asking if you'll make the dinner. I stared until the words blurred. Wanting the best is a fine disguise for wanting control. I slipped the phone back into my pocket and went topside. Wind pressed against my chest hard enough to make me lean. Waves broke white against the hull, and for a second the world looked clean, even holy. I breathed until the burn in my throat felt like proof that I was still here. When I came down again, the commander was waiting. "Congratulations," he said. "The Alliance liked your brief. They're calling it the Yates model now." I nodded. "That's flattering." "Flattery has a shelf life," he said. "Use it before it spoils." That night I wrote out the presentation draft. I started with the story instead of the math. 2 ships met in fog. One spoke too fast, one too soft. They collided not because they were enemies, but because they couldn't agree on a single language of caution. The sentence looked like truth. I left it there. Ari knocked before lights out. She had brought printouts of our test data, still warm from the machine. "Good news," she said. "Noise reduction up 20%. Bad news. Storm front heading our way by dawn." "Perfect," I said. "Let's see if the model swims." After she left, I cleaned the bridge table until every ruler and compass sat square. The sky outside flickered with distant lightning. It looked like someone was trying to write on the clouds and couldn't decide what to say. Sleep came in pieces. In one dream, I was back at the house, standing behind the half-closed kitchen door again. The same voices, the same laughter. But this time when I pushed the door open, there was no one inside, just plates still warm and a pen lying on the table, its ink pooling like blue water. I woke before dawn. The storm had arrived. The storm did not arrive with drama. It gathered itself in quiet layers as if the sky were testing how much weight it could carry before speaking. By the time I reached the bridge, the windows held a gray so complete it felt solid. The deck pitched gently, then less gently. Water hit the bow in flat palms. The ship answered with the low voice of steel. "Stations," I said. "We run the live set." Ari clipped in beside me, hair pulled back, jaw set. The radar showed 2 blips closing at a rate that would make strangers of polite captains. Wind leaned into the mast until the flag forgot how to be a flag and tried to be a rope. I set my feet the way I was taught, 1 line wide, knees unlocked, head steady. "Shared channel open," Ari said. "No interference yet." "Maintain cadence," I said. "Do not let the storm choose our words." The first transmission went out. Clear. Calm. The response came fuzzy around the edges, a nervous voice pushing too much air into its vowels. Ari adjusted gain, dropped in the anchor phrase we had practiced. "Repeat. Confirm. Hold." The storm tasted the frequency and tried to chew it. Our ladder held. A wave took us from the side and slapped the hull with enough force to push the entire room a half step to port. I felt the shift in my knees and kept my voice level. Again, we ran the sequence 3 more times as the air thickened and the windows sweated. Ari kept the bell tone I had asked for, not sweet, not sharp, just cert. She moved between settings with a grace that was not pretty and did not need to be. When the distant ship finally mirrored our rhythm, I let out a breath I had been holding since dawn. "Mark it," I said. "Time code, note the correction." She tapped the key. The screen acknowledged her with a small, polite chime. Below us, the sea changed its mind and came harder. The bow punched through, then climbed, then fell with a sound you feel in your molars. A pot from the galley rolled somewhere and someone chased it with a swear that made the junior crew grin in spite of themselves. The ship shuddered and shook it off. "Second vessel entering quadrant," Ari said. "Angle shallow, crosswind ugly." I took the mic. "This is the common channel. Keep speed. Hold your course. Confirm by count of 4. The answer took too long. The radar stuttered as if nervous. Out of the corner of my eye, I saw the commander step onto the bridge and fold his arms. He did not speak. He did not need to. "Again," I said, softer this time. "Make the fog move for you," Ari transmitted. The hesitation on the other end snapped like a small thread. The voice we needed arrived. The 2 vessels adjusted by degrees that would not impress a camera, but that saved us by a yard. Blips slid past each other with a courtesy so modest it felt like grace. I felt the click inside again, not triumph, something less bright and more durable, the feeling that comes when the math and the human part agree. "Log complete," Ari said. Good, I said. Now we break it. Her eyebrow rose. Break it, ma'am? We learn it by finding the places where it fails. We overload the channel. We flood the ladder. We make the bell ring in a room full of drunks. Then we teach the bell to ring anyway. She grinned. Copy. We poured noise into the system. Music, chatter, false alarms. The model bent, then arched, then found a new shape it could hold. Twice I thought we had beaten it, and twice Ari found a tiny adjustment that turned our defeat into a step. By midday, the storm had emptied its first anger and settled into the steady kind of rain that makes people confess or sleep. We were soaked from door to collar, and still the room smelled like work. The commander cleared his throat in a way that was almost a clap. Send that run to the forum, he said. Not the pretty one, the broken one you fixed, that is the story. Yes, sir. He paused in the doorway. You have a thing with tone, he added. You hold a room without raising your voice. Keep that. Admirals respect it even when they pretend they don't. After he left, the bridge exhaled. Ari took off her headset and rubbed the tender skin behind one ear. You still going home for dinner? She asked, casual as a deckhand coils a line. I agreed, I said. No talk of payments. If anyone raises a bill, I leave before dessert. That sounds fair. It is not about fair, I said. It is about a rule I can keep without hurting myself. We stood in silence long enough to hear the rain choose a new rhythm on the glass. Somewhere in the quiet, my phone vibrated. I expected a calendar reminder or a fishing picture from a cousin who sent his love as measurements. The screen showed a single line from my father instead. Test the ink. I read it twice, then opened the last message he had sent the night before. It does not fade. The words did not explain themselves and did not need to. I slipped the phone back into my pocket and reached for the pen on the console, the old fountain with the barrel that warmed to my hand. I drew a small line in the margin of my report. Blue sank into the paper, rich as evening, then bloomed the slightest amount into the fibers and went still. It looked like a light left on for a traveler. It looked like patience. Ma'am, Ari asked. Nothing, I said. I am thinking of porch lights. She accepted that without surprise. We went back to work. The afternoon brought a second front that never fully committed, the way some storms threaten all day and then go sulk elsewhere. We used the hours to clean our logs and trim our language. The report read like a diagram drawn by a careful hand. It did not brag. It did not apologize. It told the truth about how noise wins if you let it and how discipline beats noise when you practice it on ordinary days. By 4, we had a complete packet for the forum. Video, transcripts, failure points with fixes. I sent it with my name on the subject line and the model name beneath it like a child's middle name, important but not meant to be called in every room. I changed into a dry shirt and walked the length of the weathered deck. The sea flashed steel and then softened into slate. A cormorant sat on a buoy and made a philosophy of stillness. I wanted to borrow its patience, so I watched it long enough to feel my shoulders loosen. On my way down, the comms officer flagged me. Private call from the Capitol, he said. Forum staffer, wants a word. I took it in the tiny alcove that passes for privacy on a ship. The voice on the line was crisp and pleasantly anonymous. Lieutenant Yates, your materials arrived, she said. We have you slotted for 20 minutes sharp. The chair requests a brief anecdote before your charts. 2 minutes. Human, you have a good voice for it. Thank you, I said. I will bring something the crews will recognize. Excellent. Also, an informal dinner for delegates is scheduled the night before. We encourage attendance. It helps the questions become kinder. I will be there. She thanked me and vanished into the sound a line makes when it stops being itself. I stood with the phone in my hand and thought about a different dinner, the one I had promised to attend with a condition sitting on top like a coin on a napkin. The ship creaked. The ink line on my report dried to a quiet shine. I pressed my thumb to it and lifted. No blue came away. Evening slipped its gray coat on the water. Floodlights stamped white shapes on the deck. The storm, having done its work, left us its calm to borrow. I gave the night watch my notes and went to my quarters. The jacket I would wear in the Capitol hung from a hook, patient as furniture. I checked the seams with the superstition of a person who has learned that tiny acts protect you when grand acts are beyond your control. Before sleep, I opened the notebook and wrote one more sentence. We did not escape the weather. We learned how to speak inside it. The ink sat there with the confidence of a small vow. I added the time and closed the cover. In the dark, the ship hummed like a beast that knows its path. I fell under that sound and dreamed, not of the kitchen door this time, but of a shoreline lit by a row of simple lamps. The kind a person leans to in rain, the kind that say nothing more complicated than here. I woke just before the alarm. The storm had gone. The world smelled rinsed. We would make port by noon, and I would be on a train by evening, a seat by the window, a jacket folded over my knees, the pen in my pocket warm as a small truth. The dinner waited. The forum waited. Somewhere between the two, a choice would be asked of me again. I had already made it. The repetition would make it real. I stood, stretched, and felt the floor give the smallest amount under my feet, the way wood does when it remembers all the weight it has carried and decides to carry a little more. The capital never wakes the way the ocean does. It stirs instead, first in murmurs from hotel corridors, then in the distant roll of early buses, then in the flash of elevators gliding up and down behind mirrored doors. By the time I stepped out of my room, the day had already buttoned its collar. The conference hall smelled faintly of polish and nerves. Tables were arranged in deliberate symmetry, each nameplate gleaming. I moved through the crowd in uniform, the fabric pressed so sharp it felt like a weapon. People looked, nodded, and then looked again. Respect, curiosity, sometimes both at once. When the moderator called my name, I walked to the podium with a folder tucked against my side. The slides glowed behind me, charts, grids, calm oceans of numbers. My heart beat the way a drum sounds through fog. "Good morning," I said. "I'll be brief. The sea doesn't reward long speeches." That line earned a polite ripple of laughter. I took it, then let silence take its place. On the first slide, 2 dots approached each other, 2 ships in fog. The room's light dimmed enough for faces to blur. "This model is simple," I continued. "It assumes that miscommunication is the most common storm. We don't prevent conflict by avoiding it. We prevent it by teaching the weather how to listen." 20 minutes later, the presentation ended with a single sentence projected behind me. "Boundaries are navigation lights, not barriers." When the applause began, it was light but genuine. "Enough." The chair of the committee stood and said, "Clear, effective, concise. Lieutenant Yates will circulate your paper this week." As people filed out, one of the older delegates approached me. His medals caught the light like old coins. "Your father used to teach logistics, didn't he?" he asked. "Yes, sir," I said. "He did. He was a man of precision. You remind me of him." I thanked him and watched him walk away, leaving behind a shadow longer than his frame. For a moment I could almost hear my father's voice, low and patient. "Every lock has 2 sides, kid. Learn which one you're standing on." After the session, I found myself in a corridor lined with glass. The city reflected itself in every panel, buildings inside buildings, faces inside faces. I pressed my hand to the cool surface and felt the pulse of air conditioning instead of wind. Behind me, the staffer who'd arranged the dinner appeared with her tablet. "You did well," she said. "The chair's impressed. There's a seat reserved for you tonight at the officers' table. Will there be questions?" "There are always questions," she said, smiling. "That's how they tell you they were listening." That night, the dinner unfolded under a chandelier that looked like frozen rain. Silverware clinked in measured rhythm. The menu was all ceremony and little comfort. My uniform made me visible in ways I didn't love. Across the table, a journalist asked, "Lieutenant, do you ever feel conflicted about serving in an institution that still uses old language for new problems?" I took a sip of water. "Every system inherits its language," I said. "The job is to teach it better words." He nodded, maybe satisfied, maybe confused. Either way, he stopped asking. After dinner, I stood near the balcony doors. The city lights blurred into a field of glass stars. Someone behind me said, "Lieutenant Yates?" I turned. A woman in civilian clothes, elegant, controlled, extended her hand. "Aubrey Gray," she said, "Ethan's fiancé." For a heartbeat, every sound in the room folded into a single, thin note. She smiled like a person who'd practiced it. "I didn't want to make things awkward, but I thought I should congratulate you. The family's proud." I shook her hand because not shaking it would have been a story. "Thank you. You know, the dinner talk back home was misunderstood," she said. "It wasn't about money, it was about image. People notice generosity." "They notice manipulation too," I said. Her smile faltered. "You think I meant harm? I think you meant convenience." She blinked once, then twice, like adjusting to a stronger light. "Ethan worries about you, you know. He should worry about himself." A pause, a small tilt of her head. "You sound like your father." "I hope so." The conversation ended there. She excused herself with a gracious nod, the kind meant for witnesses. I stayed by the glass until my reflection began to look like someone else. Later, walking back to the hotel, I realized I was shaking, not from anger, but from the effort of staying still. In the room, I placed the fountain pen on the nightstand. The lamp beside it cast a circle of blue light across the pages of my notes. In the margin, I wrote a single word: Riptide. Because that was what this was, something that looks calm until you feel the pull. Sleep didn't come quickly. When it finally did, it brought a dream of my father standing on the pier, hands in pockets, watching a light blink at the end of the breakwater. He didn't speak. He didn't need to. The light kept its pattern, 3 seconds on, 2 seconds off, enough to find the way home. I woke before the alarm with the shape of the dream still warm in my hands. The breakwater light pulsed in the back of my mind, 3 on, 2 off, like a breath exercise for an anxious city. I brewed the hotel coffee and let it sit until the steam thinned to a thin ribbon. Outside the window, the Capitol rearranged its reflections. People behind glass walked past people behind more glass. Somewhere in that bright maze, I needed one decision that felt like air. By late morning, the forum staff asked me to meet a small working group in a side room that looked like a chapel for graphs. We talked through adoption timelines, translation gaps, and the polite warfare of acronyms. A senior advisor from another flag said, with the tone of a compliment disguised as doubt, that my model sounded a little too human. I answered that radios carry human voices, not immaculate math, and that the sea cares about clarity more than perfect theory. He nodded as if I had reminded him of something he already knew. When I checked my phone at the elevator, a message from my mother waited with a careful subject line. Dinner at 7, no talk of money. She added a small sentence that did not quite sit still. Your father wants to grill fish. That line reached through the screen and touched a part of me I had been keeping quiet. Fish on the grill meant the backyard, paper plates, and the kind of talk that can survive smoke and wind. I typed back a yes. I added my now familiar condition in one clean sentence. If bills appear, I leave. She wrote back understood. The period at the end of that word looked like a pebble placed to hold down a napkin. In the afternoon, I walked along the river and practiced the opening anecdote the staffer had requested. 2 ships in fog, one speaking too fast, one too soft, the small adjustment that kept the bows from kissing. It felt honest. It did not feel like theater. I said it once to the current and once to the wind and let both carry it away. Evening dressed the city in gold and shadow. I changed into civilian clothes, soft shoes, and a clean shirt, then tucked the fountain pen into my pocket out of habit. I took the train to the old station, and from there a rideshare that knew the way to the street where I had learned to ride without training wheels. The driver kept the radio low. The news mentioned weather in passing, a front migrating along a shipping lane I knew by heart. The words brushed my skin like the idea of rain. The house looked smaller than it used to. Most houses do. The porch light was on. My mother opened the door before I could knock. She looked exactly like herself and also like a person who had slept badly for a week. We touched shoulders in the kitchen the way people do when they share blood and also borders. The smell of grill smoke and lemon butter found me like a song I had not realized I missed. In the backyard, my father stood by the grill with a fork in one hand and a plate in the other. He wore the sweater with the elbow patches that never fit anyone but him. He looked at me over the heat, nodded, then adjusted a fillet of bluefish as if fish listened to posture. We stood there in the orange light that coals make. He said one sentence without turning his head. Good you came hungry. It was the closest he had come to saying welcome home in months. Ethan arrived late with a paper bag of bread he did not slice. He hugged me with a little too much care, like hugging a guest. Aubrey stayed near the patio table, admiring the arrangement of cut flowers she had brought in a glass vase. She said hello with the same practiced smile as the night before, only softer, as if a private director had given a note. We ate at the picnic table under the string lights we never took down after one long summer. Plates were heavy enough for a porch, but they still clinked as if trying to be inside dishes. Conversation stayed in the safe lanes. Work, weather, the neighbor who had painted his fence the color of toothpaste. I waited for the word money to break the surface like a dark fin. It did not. Halfway through the meal, my father set his fork down and folded his hands the way he does when he is about to test a rope. His voice was slow, as if choosing the weight for each word. I measured you by the wrong ruler, he said. I thought money could keep us inside the kind of story people approve. Turns out the story I needed to be proud of was the one where you told us no. I did not reach for him. I did not make a speech. I said thank you and meant it. He nodded once, satisfied with the shape the air had taken. Ethan cleared his throat and spoke to the table, which is how he apologizes when he is not ready to aim the words at a face. I let the planning run over me, he said. I liked how it made me feel important. Then the investment went under and I remembered that importance is the first thing to sink. He looked up then, and for a moment his face looked like the boy who had once taught me to ride without hands and then ran along beside me with his arms out anyway. I am sorry, he said. It sounded like a perfectly sized tool. Aubrey moved her glass in a slow circle that chased the lemon slice. I waited for her to speak. She chose the kind of sentence that invites agreement more than conversation. "We all want the best for this family." She looked at me as if handing me a well-folded napkin. I answered with a nod too small to be mistaken for surrender. We cleared plates in the quiet way of people who have said enough for one sitting. In the kitchen, my mother rinsed the knife and handed me a towel. She did not make a speech either. She said only, "Will you take some fish for the train?" I said I would. She wrapped it in paper and wrote the date on the outside in familiar blue ink. When I stepped out to the porch to say goodnight, my father followed with 2 mugs. Tea for him, nothing for me. He stood at the rail and watched the dark yard as if waiting for something to walk out of it. He spoke without turning. "Your talk about the ladder and the bell," he said. "You have a talent for tone. I remember you at 6, telling the neighbor kid that the sprinkler was a dragon and that the safe way through was to follow your voice. You had the right pace even then." He sipped and let the steam fog his glasses. "Keep that," he said. "It is better than a loud voice and it lasts longer." He set his mug down and reached into his pocket. He placed a manila envelope on the rail, the small kind used for photographs and certificates. My name was written on it in his square hand. He did not slide it toward me with ceremony. He simply placed it where the wood was dry and left his hand there for a second as if warming the air. "For tomorrow," he said. Then he picked up his tea and went inside. I did not open it on the porch. I held it by one corner and watched how the paper caught the porch light. Inside, it felt like pages and the whisper of a thin tab. In my room, I laid it on the bed and opened the flap with my nail. A set of printouts, access instructions, a preliminary clearance sheet from a data office I did not expect to hear from. At the top of the first page, a faint signature in blue that I knew as well as my own. Not spelled out, only the particular lean of the letters, the way the tail of the last one lifted like a small flag. A sticky note in the same blue, 3 words in a handwriting that did not like to rush. "The light is on." I sat down on the bed with the envelope in my lap and the pen on the nightstand within reach. I did not cry. I did not rehearse a thank you for later. I let the feeling move through me like a current that knew where it was going. On the train back to the hotel, the city looked like a lantern someone had set on the floor. I pressed the envelope against my ribs and felt the paper warm to my skin. When I reached the room, I slid the pages under my notes and then wrote a single line in the margin. "The light is on." The ink took to the paper like water finds a channel. Sleep came soft and stayed. It brought no dream of doors or waves, only a stretch of steady water and the sense of a bell somewhere, patient and exact. Morning cracked open in quiet. The welcome email from the forum chair arrived with a set of logistics stamped in tidy boxes. I answered with thanks and attached the updated packet that included the storm test and Ari's clean logs. Before I sent it, I added the 2-minute anecdote. 2 ships, fog, a bell that refuses to shout. I read it aloud once. It sounded like a person and not a brochure. I packed my case. I checked the jacket, the shoes, the small kit of cables that could save me if a port failed. The pen went into my inside pocket, left side. The envelope went flat against the back panel of the case, where it would not bend. In the mirror, a calm face looked back. Calm is not the absence of weather. Calm is a set of choices. On the way out, I stopped in the lobby to buy a small pack of breath mints and realized the cashier was reading the morning paper. A headline at the bottom of the front page mentioned a congestion advisory for a strait I knew too well. Heavy traffic, mixed signals, an accident at dawn that had stopped short of disaster. I touched the paper with one finger as if feeling for a pulse. The cashier followed my gaze and said without looking up, "Busy lanes today." I nodded and said, "That is why we practice." Outside, the air tasted like a storm that had decided to take a day off. I walked toward the hall with the practiced pace of a person who will not be late and will not run. In my pocket, the pen rested against my heartbeat. In my case, the envelope rode steady. The day waited. The glass walls of the Capitol glittered and held their breath. Somewhere beyond those walls, the sea gathered its own meeting. I could feel it as surely as if my boots were already back on the deck. The next part would ask for more than clear sentences and tidy slides. It would ask for the bell to ring when the room was not listening. I touched the pen through the fabric and thought of the note my father had left. "The light is on." Then I stepped inside. Morning found me walking toward the Forum building with the same steadiness a ship shows after a long repair. The sky was cloudless, the kind that looks like it's holding its breath before something shifts. Inside the main hall, the air hummed with microphones being tested and screens flickering through their opening slides. When my turn came, I placed the folder on the podium and took a single breath that felt borrowed from the sea. "Two vessels," I began, both believing they had right of way. One spoke too fast, one too soft. They met in fog and never quite saw each other. The ocean forgave them, but only because we listened. The anecdote settled the room. Then came charts, maps, and the rhythm of data, every number a witness. 20 minutes later, I closed with the line that had become a heartbeat to me. "Boundaries are lighthouses, not walls." Applause built carefully, like a tide deciding if it should rise. I caught sight of the chair's nod and the way a few faces turned toward one another with that small look people share when they know a new rule might have just been written. After the panel, I stood by the glass railing that overlooked the atrium. My reflection floated over the city. Behind it, clouds began to gather again. The next speaker talked about economic corridors, but my phone vibrated with a message from Operations Command. "Urgent, contact needed, shipping incident. Your model flagged in response queue." I excused myself, found a quiet corridor, and dialed. The line connected to the base. Ari's voice came through, tight, professional, trying to hide excitement. "Lieutenant, we had a near collision in the Southern Strait. Two freighters, civilian crews, mixed languages. They used the ladder you designed. It worked. No impact, no casualties." I closed my eyes. The hallway smell of floor polish faded, the sea returned. "Send me the log," I said, "every second. It's already in your secure folder. Also, someone authorized temporary access to the full maritime data gate. Clearance came from the top. We thought maybe you." "I didn't." "Well, someone did. Signature code begins with Y, could be an internal tag." "Why my initial?" "My father's initial too." I thanked her, ended the call, and opened the encrypted drive on my laptop. The access file sat there waiting, time-stamped midnight. The verification seal shimmered faintly blue, the same blue as the ink on the envelope he'd given me. I opened it. Inside were datasets normally locked behind layers of classification: satellite relays, acoustic readings, coordination patterns between allied fleets. Enough material to validate my entire model for global use. Enough also to ruin a career if obtained the wrong way. At the bottom of the metadata page sat a name, James Yates. I stared until the letters blurred into the light of the screen. My father had pulled a string so large it made the bridge we'd built last night feel like a footpath. He'd done it quietly, in the same way he grilled fish, methodical, exact, pretending it was nothing. The next notification arrived before I could breathe. Press requests pending, comment on Yates' model success. The news had already escaped the room. It always does. I walked outside into the open air. The city had gone darker, storm clouds massing over the river. Wind moved between buildings with the same sound ropes make when tightened. I looked up and thought of my father's words on the porch. "Keep your tone." He had not said good luck. He had said something better. "Hold your voice steady even when you are the only one who can hear it." The phone rang again, Operations Command requesting immediate briefing for the press. I agreed. On the way back inside, I opened my notebook and wrote a single note in the margin beside today's date. "The light is on." It was the only confirmation I needed. The press room had the color of a winter morning. Cameras blinked awake like curious birds. Rows of chairs waited with the patience of old pews. A staffer clipped a small mic to my collar and said the sentence people always say before you face a crowd: "You will be fine." I nodded as if agreement could make it true. The chair introduced me with a string of nouns and dates. I stepped to the podium and let my hands find the edges where the wood had been polished smooth by others who had stood and tried to make sense. The first question came before I could open my notes. "Lieutenant, can you confirm reports that your model prevented a collision in the Southern Strait this morning?" I met the eye behind the lens that asked it. "Yes, two freighters used the shared ladder protocol. They slowed in time. No injuries." The second question aimed for a prize. "Who authorized the data gate that validated your model?" There are whispers of unusual access. I thought of the envelope on the bed last night, the note in blue, the way my father had set his hand on the rail as if warming a space for me to rest my own. "Unusual does not always mean improper," I said. The gate was opened by a proper signature. The data is now in the hands of the committee. A murmur ran across the room like wind across a wheat field. Someone asked if I could share the name attached to the authorization. I could have deflected. I could have said the review process would speak for itself. Instead, I said the truth that would come out whether I named it or not. The signature reads James Yates. Pens moved. A camera zoomed close enough to count the stitches on my collar. The next question tried to turn the truth into a story it could sell. "Your father. Does that not represent a conflict?" I let the question hang long enough to be seen for what it was. My father is a retired teacher of logistics, I said. He has friends in offices where clearance lives. He made a call. He did not ask me first. He did not give me material I should not have. He cleared a path for the material to be examined by the people whose work is to examine it. If that is a conflict, it is one the process can measure in daylight. Storm light shifted behind the windows. The river turned the color of old steel. I could feel the weather choose a direction. I kept my voice level. We strengthen systems not by hiding help but by naming it and testing it. I welcome the test. The moderator raised a hand. One last question, she said, and called on a reporter in a navy suit whose patience had finally paid off. He asked whether the Yates model would force crews to abandon the instincts that had kept them alive for decades. No, I said. It teaches those instincts a shared alphabet. It lets one crew say careful and another crew understand it as the same word. The sea is generous with second chances, but we should not make her spend them on translation. The room softened its shoulders. People stood, some fast, some slow. The storm returned to its glass door. When it was over, a young officer I did not know pressed a thumb drive into my hand. A cross-fleet capture of the morning incident, he said. The language worked. He looked like a person who had not slept but had found something worth the night. I walked out through a corridor that smelled like coiled cable and lemon cleaner. The elevator ride down was the kind that feels longer than stairs. When the doors opened, Ari's face filled my phone. She was in the ops room, hair up, eyes bright. We did it, she said. The logs matched the model. Also, the committee chair sent a note that the data gate will be formalized for future tests. She lowered her voice. They want you to lead the working group. I let the news settle to the bottom instead of letting it froth at the top. Tell the team I am proud, I said. Save me the failure runs. I want to learn where we were weakest. Outside the building, the storm finally decided to speak. Rain drew clean lines between buildings. The river breathed louder. I stood under the small cover of an awning and pulled the envelope from my case. I slid a page free and read the access chain again, each stamp placed with the certainty of a person who hates sloppy work. At the bottom, the signature in blue waited like a small door left gently open. I called my father. He answered on the second ring with a sound that always makes me see sawdust and a measuring tape. He asked if the fish had traveled well. I said it had. Then I said his name, and the silence between us arranged itself into a room we both knew. You opened a gate, I said. I did, he said. You did not ask me. Would you have said yes? No, I said, not last week. Then I am glad I did not ask last week. He coughed, which was his way of putting a glove on a tender thing. The work needed light, he said. Light like skates. I know people who still remember how to unlock one when the latch is stuck. There will be questions, I said. Let them ask, he said. You are good at answers. Your mother says you have a voice now. Keep it. I waited, hoping he would say the word proud and knowing he would not. He said something better. The light is on. Come home when you like. No bills on the table. I said thank you and let him go first, the way you do when you are still learning how to walk together through a door. The rain eased and then returned with a softer hand. I took the path to the river and watched a dark barge push water aside with patient authority. The city blurred to a watercolor. A gull flew low and found a seam of air that held it without effort. I breathed until my ribs stopped arguing with my lungs. Back at the hotel, I sent the packet to the committee with a cover note that named the authorization plainly and invited an audit. I copied my commander. I copied legal. The send button felt heavy and then light. I set the pen beside the keyboard and noticed a thin ring of blue on my thumb where a drop had escaped. I rubbed it and it refused to lift. It looked like a small promise that had chosen skin over paper. It looked like a mark that says, do not forget. As evening fell, the city put on its lights. The dinner for the delegates buzzed 2 floors below. I did not go. Instead, I ordered a simple meal and ate it by the window. The deck of the barge was now a line of beads moving through the dark. I raised a glass of water to it. Safe passage, I said, and felt ridiculous for a second and then felt fine. My phone vibrated once. A text from Ethan. Proud of you, he wrote, then corrected himself. No, not proud of the model. Proud that you told the room the truth and did not dress it up. I stared at the message until the letters steadied. I typed back, thank you. The words felt like a small dock to tie to for a moment. I slept the deep sleep of a person who has been seen and has not fallen apart. The storm moved on in the night. Morning would bring the formal notes and the meetings where people claim ownership. It would also bring a train to the coast and a dinner where no one would mention money. Between those 2 rooms, I would carry the same pen and the same rule. Keep the tone. Set the light. Speak the shared word before the weather can confuse it. Before I turned off the lamp, I opened the notebook and wrote one more line. We did not win a prize. We made a pattern. Then I added the date and a small dot of blue that spread just enough to look alive. The train toward the coast ran through a country half-remembered. Towns passed like punctuation, fields, silos, the occasional silver flash of a canal. I watched the window and saw my reflection float over it, superimposed on hills that rolled without effort. The calm after storms can be suspicious, but that morning it felt earned. My inbox filled itself with ceremony, congratulations, meeting invites, policy drafts that would bend my name into acronyms. I answered none. The only message I sent was to Ari, stand by for review version 2. Keep testing. Don't let the ladder rust. When the train slid into the coastal station, the air changed. It smelled of iron, salt, and something older than both. My hometown. The harbor cranes looked smaller, like toys a child had forgotten. I walked the short road toward the pier and found my father already there, standing exactly where he had been in my dream, the breakwater behind him, the lighthouse winking its slow pulse. He held 2 cups of coffee. One black, one ruined with sugar, he said. The wind carried the steam sideways. I still take sugar, I said. I never doubted it. We stood shoulder to shoulder, watching a tug guide a rust-red barge through the mouth of the harbor. Its horn sounded twice, one long, one short, the same code he had taught me when I was 10, departing Port Clear Channel. I asked him what he had risked by signing that clearance. He shrugged. Old favors, old names, they like feeling useful. And if it had gone wrong, then I'd have been the one audited, not you. That's what fathers are for. The simplicity of it landed like a weight and a mercy. We drank in silence until the cups were empty and the wind had turned warmer. I keep thinking, I said, about the model, the noise, the way people still choose to shout. He nodded, because shouting feels like power. But the bell wins, doesn't it? It doesn't need to scream. The gulls screamed for us. The sound bounced off the water and came back smaller, like an echo remembering its manners. He handed me a small box wrapped in brown paper. Your mother found this cleaning the attic, said it belonged to you. Inside was a compass, brass, scratched, older than I was. The needle trembled, then steadied north. On the back, faintly engraved, were 4 words, for when maps fail, I closed the lid carefully. You always liked metaphors, I said. It's not a metaphor, he said. It's a tool. We walked back toward the house, past the fences and the same stubborn rose bush that had outlived every pruning. My mother waved from the porch, apron fluttering like a flag of truce. Ethan's car was gone. Aubrey's bouquet had wilted in its vase but still smelled expensive. The world, for the first time in months, felt balanced on its own center. That evening, over dinner that was neither formal nor apologetic, my father asked if I would return to the capital. For a while, I said. They'll want implementation teams, but the base needs me first. I owe them the next phase. He nodded. Work's only worth it if it changes something you can point at. Later, when the lights were out, I stepped onto the porch. The lighthouse blinked its 3-2 rhythm across the dark. I thought of every message that had crossed every sea that year, coded, fractured, delayed, and felt the strange calm of knowing one light still kept time. I took out my notebook and wrote, there are no perfect maps. Only voices clear enough to steer by. Then I closed the cover and let the salt air have the rest of the night. 2 days later, the sea called me back in the way it always does, not loudly, but with the gravity of something that remembers my weight. The train from the coast reached the base at dawn. The hangars were still half asleep, but the smell of oil and salt had already begun to wake the place. When I stepped inside the operations wing, the first thing I saw was Ari leaning over the console, hair tied back, face framed by the pale blue glow of new data. She looked up as if she'd been expecting me for hours. You're early, she said. I missed the noise, I answered. She smiled and slid a report across the table. You'll want to see this. The committee's official review. The top sheet carried the seal of the Maritime Alliance and the neat lines of bureaucracy at its most careful. Model approved for provisional deployment. Beneath it, another signature, mine, and then lower still, authorization maintained under prior clearance. I felt my father's presence in that line, the way his shadow could stand beside mine even when we were oceans apart. Ari cleared her throat. There's something else, an anomaly. She opened a separate log, one the system had flagged only after the first deployment. A transmission, faint and half-corrupted, from the early hours after the Strait incident. The source was unregistered, origin unknown. The message repeated a single phrase, when the light stays on too long, the sea forgets the stars. It wasn't coded, but it felt like one. I listened to the crackle, the measured gaps, the voice barely human beneath the static. Playback origin? No satellite match, Ari said. Closest trace is a maintenance buoy off the northern reef. Old tech, almost obsolete. I stared at the waveform, hypnotized by its heartbeat. Schedule a retrieval. I'll go with the team. You think it's a threat? I think it's a reminder. By noon, we were aboard the patrol craft Halcyon, heading north under a sky too bright to trust. The sea had the color of glass bottles and secrets. I stood on deck as the spray salted my lips and the engines hummed steady. When we reached the coordinates, the buoy rose from the water like an old coin rediscovered by chance. Rust streaked its body, and the light at its crown flickered with exhaustion. I climbed down the rope ladder, the way I'd done 100 times in training, and set my boots on the narrow ring. The plaque at its base read Beacon JY1. My breath stopped. JY, James Yates. I touched the metal. Cold, familiar. The serial matched the year I had joined the service, the year my father had given me the pen. He must have installed this beacon himself during his advisory years. The message in the log wasn't from a stranger. It was from a machine he had left behind, one that had somehow found its voice again. I opened the casing with my multi-tool. Inside, the circuit board blinked once as if recognizing a name. I extracted the drive, sealed it in a waterproof sleeve, and climbed back up. On board, Ari examined it with a reverence usually reserved for relics. Data's old, but still readable. Audio plus a small text file. The playback began. My father's voice, steady, deliberate, filled the cabin. If you're hearing this, the line between order and obedience has blurred again. Remember, the system you build will someday speak louder than you do. Make sure it learns your tone before it learns your rules. The file ended with a timestamp from 7 years ago. I stood very still. Ari looked at me. He knew. He always did. We sailed back in near silence, the horizon burning gold ahead of us. I held the drive in my palm, the weight of a message meant for a future he trusted me to reach. That night, back at the base, I placed the drive beside the pen on my desk. 2 objects that could outlive their maker. I opened my notebook one last time for the day and wrote, "We teach machines to listen so we don't forget how. The light stays on so someone can find the shore, even if the stars go dark." Outside, the sea answered with a hush that sounded almost like applause. The next morning began without ceremony, just the whir of the base generators, the smell of metal coffee, and the low rhythm of waves brushing the dock. The world had gone still, as if waiting for me to decide what I would become now that the storm had ended. The data from the buoy had been decrypted overnight. Ari stood beside me in the operations bay as the file finished rendering. Lines of text appeared across the screen, precise and deliberate, the language of someone who understood both maps and metaphors. Beacon maintenance log JY1. If this signal wakes again, it means the model is alive. It will guide more than ships. One day, voices will stop being human on these channels. Teach them not to shout. It wasn't a warning. It was a charge, one he must have written long before I understood the shape of his faith. I realized then that my father had never built systems to keep people safe. He had built them to remind us what safety sounded like. I asked Ari to archive the file under my command ID and mark it as non-obsolete. She nodded, though I could tell she wanted to ask what it meant. I told her later. Before noon, the commander called me into his office. The walls were bare except for a clock that had forgotten to tick. He looked tired in the way people look when history starts asking for reports. "You understand what your father's clearance means," he said. "The Alliance wants you to lead the integration task force. You'll be the youngest officer to hold that post." I waited. There's always a but. He leaned forward. "If you accept, you'll leave active sea duty. You'll be behind a desk, building models that other people will test." The air inside that sentence felt too thin. "You think I can't do both? I think you have to decide which storm you want to steer." I didn't answer right away. The clock's silent hands stood at 12. Noon or midnight, it didn't matter. Every choice is a kind of tide. "I'll decide after I visit Beacon JY1, I said. He frowned. "Again?" "Yes, once more, it's personal." He let me go. That afternoon, the patrol boat cut through calm water. The buoy rose on the horizon, steady, patient. I stood at the bow and felt the old hum in my bones, the same hum that had carried me through storms and silence alike. When I reached it, I didn't climb down this time. I simply stood close enough to read the faded inscription on its side. The salt had worn away half the letters, but I could still make out 2 words. "Listen well." I whispered, "I hear you." The sea answered with a soft slap against the hull, and I could swear just for a moment that the buoy blinked, 3 seconds on, 2 off. My father's pattern. I turned to Ari. "Tell command I'll accept the post," I said. She smiled. "I thought you would." Back at base, I signed the assignment papers. The ink from my fountain pen bled slightly where the nib hesitated, just enough to prove the hand behind it was human. That evening, I walked the length of the pier alone. The lighthouse on the far headland burned its cycle into the dusk, 3 on, 2 off. I took the compass from my pocket and held it flat in my palm. The needle trembled once, then stilled. It pointed north, but more than that, it pointed home. I wrote my last entry of the day beneath the hum of sodium lights. The ocean does not remember every ship that crosses it, but it remembers every voice that spoke clearly. That is enough. Then I closed the notebook, tucked the pen inside, and watched the tide begin to turn. Night returned to the harbor in fragments, first as violet, then as steel, then as a slow quiet that settled over the decks like dust. I stayed in the command office long after the others had gone, rereading the reports and the transcripts of my father's beacon message. Teach them not to shout. The words had started to feel less like advice and more like a design specification. Machines now spoke the languages we built for them. One day, they'd speak without us. The thought both comforted and frightened me. I reached for the envelope again. Hidden behind the clearance forms was something I hadn't noticed before, a final folded page, creased along its edges. I smoothed it across the desk. At the top, in his handwriting, was a line I'd seen 100 times in his old notebooks. Every signal carries an echo. Below that, a small paragraph written in finer strokes. If you're reading this, the system recognized your tone. It means you didn't let them strip the human out of the work. There's one more file, buried in the beacon's root memory. I left it there so you'd have to go back not as a daughter or an officer, but as both. I sat back, heart ticking a new rhythm. He had left me a message within a message. At dawn, I was back aboard Halcyon, headed once more toward Beacon JY1. The sea was flat as paper, the kind of calm that asks questions you can't yet answer. Ari stood beside me, silent except for the occasional check of coordinates. When we reached the buoy, the sunrise turned the water copper. I lowered myself down again, tools ready. This time, beneath the circuit plate, a hidden compartment weighted thin as a secret and sealed with a strip of marine wax. Inside was a single data chip labeled Y-Echo. I inserted it into the portable reader. Static, then a voice not my father's, my own. A recording from years earlier when I was still a cadet giving a field presentation. Communication isn't command, my younger self said. It's trust repeated until it becomes sound. Then his voice layered over mine, quiet and proud. You said it best before you forgot you, said it. The file ended. No code, no coordinates, just a loop of those two voices blending, his steady, mine raw, both still learning how to share air. For a long time I stayed there, letting the sea rock me, the beacon's faint light brushing the back of my hand. Ari called down once to ask if I was all right. I answered honestly. I think I finally am. We left the buoy burning softly behind us, the color of a heartbeat under glass. Back at the base, I filed the discovery under Legacy Archives / non-replicable assets. No one would understand what it was, and that was fine. It wasn't for policy. It was for memory. That evening, I stood on the observation deck and watched a line of ships pass the horizon one by one, each blinking its pattern into the dark. 3 seconds on, 2 off. The rhythm had spread, crew to crew, vessel to vessel, until the sea itself seemed to breathe with it. My father had called it a ladder, but it was more like a chorus. I took out my pen, opened my notebook to the last page, and wrote slowly so the ink could think with me. He left me the light, but the voice was always mine to keep. When I closed the book, the reflection of the beacon flickered in the glass before me, and for the first time I didn't need to look to know where it was. The light stayed on. The sea remembered the stars, and I, Sailor Yates, finally knew the difference between silence and peace.